that remind you of anything? Nothing?
The external conditions being like some of those, like the blank on which the metronomes were.
Well, actually, that's part of where I'm going to, so that's a good thing to pick up.
Affordances?
Yes, that's where I'm going.
Oh, okay.
That sounds like an affordance to
I didn't know
me.
what that was.
Affordance.
Affordance.
He said affordances. He talked about the metronome being, the plank. And so y'all are both, I think, perceptive as to you're picking up on what I picked up on. But let's go on with this quote here. Another way of putting it is to say that the interaction between the low energy or informational constraints and the epistemon predicts the overall functional action, if undertaken now, will be successful. In short, the meaning of information is the prediction of successful functional action. And this is another thing, that the predictive idea and the predictive model also kind of creeps into here, which is, I think, kind of neat. This guy, Barham, is not well known, he's not well cited, but I believe I have an understanding of why Freeman seemed to cite him so often. And
I'm not sure if you said this earlier, is he a physicist or?
he's a philosopher
Okay.
of biology.
Okay.
And I think he's got some other domains that he's written in, and as far as I can tell, he's a freelancer.
Okay.
You know, he is not, he doesn't have a position at any university currently, and he may have at some point, but I can't remember exactly. I looked him up once.
Is he still active? I think your diagram was from '96. So.
Yeah, I think he's. When I looked to find this paper on Google Scholar just yesterday, I think I saw some more recent things, like maybe something as recent as 2012. I can't remember. Maybe more so. But I wasn't looking real closely. So, but yeah, I think he's done some stuff. He's a smart guy. All right, so that's Barham. Before we go away from Barham and back towards Gibson, any questions about that model? We can look at this again. Does this make more sense now, or has that helped kind of fill in what's going on in this figure? And the dark lines indicate a stronger couplings, and the dotted lines indicate weaker couplings. Okay, so Poulin hinted at where I'm going at now. Gibson talked a lot about illumination and the ambient illumination. The model of radiation physics, where we have an atom emitting a photon and you have a point source with rays of light emanating from it in all directions, obviously a very useful model, goes back at least to Newton, I think, and bringing it forward, it has many applications and many theoretical. It has definitely been triumphantly explains many physical phenomena. But as far as the light in our atmosphere goes, that we encounter in an ecological context, this model of illumination is really a better place to start. And it is an open system. The terrestrial illumination is an open system. There is constantly an influx of solar radiation and an efflux of terrestrial radiation. So there's a constant inflow and outflow. It's not a stable, closed system. Now, within our local environments, the illumination bounces off of everything, and it reaches a steady state, but there's, after continual reflection, refraction, transmission, absorption, and re-emission, and it's a very rich optical environment. Now, where I'm going with this, and I think that many in this kind of conceptual domain would agree, that the optic array that Gibson talks about is a sample from a dynamical system. And the dynamical system is the ambient illumination. Okay? And you know, each point in an optic array, each position in space at which there is a unique optic array, the light reaching that point is changing as a function of time. And each organism never exactly samples the precise location twice, unless maybe they've got their head in a fixator and they're staring, you know, with their eyeballs locked to a cross on the screen. Okay. All right, so Gibson from a dynamical perspective. This optic array is an environmental oscillator. It's the low energy constraints in an environmental medium, which is the
Let's go back for a moment,
okay.
previous. I don't really have a good idea after all of this of what an optic array is.
Wow, I thought you had at last talk you seemed to have a good idea of it.
Yeah,
You remember the concept of solid angle?
yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
And at any given point, if you take a solid angle of space around that point, and you imagine light reaching that point from every point on the solid angle. Or if you look at the stars in the sky.
Oh, wait a minute, if I do that, what is the relation between that and the optic array?
The optic array is that the optic intensity at every point on the solid angle.
The optic array then is a set of intensities?
You can think of it in that way. You can think of it.
Like a campfire. Like if you have like a campfire at the very center, it's going to be very bright, and as you go out.
No. It's not about light coming out from something. It's about light that converges to something. Okay? So at any point, yes, there is light coming from every direction. So right now, as you
light is coming from every direction because it's reflecting off of various things.
yes, and you can test this as you fix your gaze on me.
Yeah,
Your visual perceptual system is located such that an optic array is available to your sensory system, and from at every point within your field of vision, which is not the entire solid angle. You can't sample the entire solid angle. You don't. I mean, you have edges that are able to be sensed by you. But for instance, there's a corner in the room here, and light is reaching my eye from that corner. There's a corner here where Siddharth is sitting, and though I don't clearly see him, the light that's coming to this point is as rich in information about Siddharth as the light coming to me is about you. It's just, this is the light that's hitting my fovea, and this light is hitting some other part of my visual field that's less. I'm just.
so the way to think of this thing is that the optic array is whatever is arriving at a point in a sense organ, for example.
Yes, well, he talks about it in terms of the position in the environment
Yeah.
that a sense organ could potentially occupy. And so if you think about the inside of a basketball, which is kind of too Euclidean, so I guess a better for Gibson, so a better example would be the night sky.
Mhm.
You know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a sphere, it's a spherical geometry, yeah.
Okay, I have a
Uh,
Yes.
We should proceed with the optic array, but the ambient illumination, but I think we should also remember there's ambient sound, there's ambient other sensory data, heat.
Oh, yes.
and
Oh, yes.
The brain is dealing with all of those.
Let's not,
We should not
Let's-
chase those, but we shouldn't forget either. I mean,
Agreed,
we're using one
agreed.
paradigm thing to describe.
agree.
But
When-
there are a
when we-
whole bunch of things doing that.
Yes,
And the
agreed.
Barham stuff applies to any of them.
That's
not-
right.
Not just.
That's
not
right.
just the Gibson.
That's right. And Gibson talks about in the census considered as a perceptual system, 1966, he talks about these other things. And I believe if he had not died in 79, when he wrote this book that Paul and I read, he would have said more about those other senses.
Sure.
Yeah, and yeah, there's no question. But yes, I agree, both Gibson and Barham would, and these ideas could, I can see how they could be extended, and I think everyone's nodding, so.
I'm ready to go on to the next one.
Okay. All right. So the optic array is an environmental oscillator. It's a dynamical system. The light, the ambient illumination, it changes with time.
Low energy constraints.
And the medium, as Gibson calls it, is the ambient illumination. I mean, the illumination and the medium are not distinguishable biologically. You know, we can create an abstract model where we have some empty space and then we fill that with the illumination. You know, but Gibson, as I've preached a little bit in previous talks, Gibson eschews such models in favor of models that are grounded in the biological realities that perception deals with immediately and directly. So, so in that context, that's what the medium is. And so it's a dynamical system. And invariance, okay, now this is something I can't develop very well. I can't tell you what the mathematical description of these dynamical patterns would look like, but I'm saying that invariants, as Gibson describes them, are like attractors in the optic array. They are attractors in the optic array. Now, attractors in what state space and exactly what's defines their shape, I can't tell you. But go ahead.
Are they predictable?
Predictable. There's a lot we've said in previous talks about invariance. It's a difficult concept to grasp. I'm not sure what you mean by predictable, but the title slide had an example of texture gradients, which is a kind of invariant that specifies, in Gibson's words, a perception of depth.
Yeah.
And they're certainly regular. Is that okay? They have a regularity. They define something. They are a constraint on the possible states of the system.
What's the they?
The attractors, the invariants. He asked, are they predictable? And I was able to say they are regular in some fashion. They are constrained relative to the total possible states of the system.
So what's an example, a common example of one invariant?
The texture gradients that I showed on the first slide, do you remember them?
I remember them.
Yes, those are, that is an example of a gradient that specifies depth, distance, and shape.
Gradient that specifies
It can specify any of those things depending on the context.
what can
The Gibson's
Can
idea of a
specify
texture
what?
gradient,
specify again?
depth,
Depth?
or Gibson doesn't like that word because depth perception, that model, he calls it extent. Okay?
Okay.
it can specify extent, and then in the case of an object, it can specify shape.
Shape, and what else?
What else did I say? I can't.
Distance,
Huh?
distance?
Distance, I think it's related to extent.
Mhm.
Is that all I said? Yeah.
Wait, but what's the invariant?
Yeah, we've had this conversation numerous times, and
Okay,
I don't know how to keep having it again, sort of like Sisyphus.
Flat surface that you would walk on was the one he used.
A flat surface has certain characteristics.
is a flat surface one invariant?
No, an invariant would be some feature of the optical array that is generated in the presence of a flat surface. A perspective transformation, I had a movie last time, I'm sorry if you don't remember it, but I can't help it. You know, I mean, we need to take this offline if we can't wrap it up quickly, because we spent a lot of time, I've reviewed it numerous times. Does anyone else remember the perspective transformation movie?
No, not the movie, but I know the invariant.
You know the rotating rectangle.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Does that ring a bell?
Rotating rectangle.
Yeah. It's actually a series of 4 distinct shapes. A rectangle, 5 trapezoids, and a line.
Yeah,
And if they're put in the right sequence, you don't perceive them as 5 separate shapes. You perceive them as one object, a rectangle that rotates, if they're put in the correct
I can
sequence.
imagine that.
No.
If you have that, what's the invariant?
It's called perspective transformation. It is
Perspective transformation
is Gibson's name for it,
for an invariant?
for this invariant, which the rotating example is an example, the rotating rectangle is an example of. You have, in this case, 4, here, I'll just break out and go to the,
Steve, what helps me with invariant is that image where there are bars of different lengths, and then they
Go down all, like
yeah,
a seam hollow.
like a farm of vertical bars, and then they we perceive it to be extending far beyond.
vertical bars. Are you talking about, here, let me go on with this now, since I'm
Yes,
here.
like lines on the top and the bottom.
There,
Yeah.
the invariants in a perspective transformation include the connectedness of the 4 lines.
That there's connected always.
Yes.
So the connection is one invariant.
Well, no, he calls the whole thing an invariant. And these elements, see, this is what he calls a higher order invariant in the optic array. Now, if you try to think of it in terms of one variable, like the derivative of one function, it doesn't reduce like that. We don't know the mathematical description, but there are elements in a perspective transformation, the connectedness of the 4 sides, the relation of those sides together to each other. Okay, there's 4 sides. They're always in the same order as you rotate, unless it flips around, in which case they reverse. And there's always an orderly progression. For instance, if we proceed down this way, we see what looks to be a rotating rectangle. If I were to flip the location of any of these 2 slides, it would destroy the invariant.
You flip the rotation.
Yeah. If I move this up here and now go through, let me go back. Okay, so we have the rotation, and now it went. You see, that was the wrong order. See, I put 2 in the wrong order. That's more subtle because I just flipped 2. But you could take these shapes and you put them in a random order,
Yeah.
and you will not get a perception of a rotating object.
Mhm.
So
I understand that.
the invariant is his word for a lawful relationship between elements of successive arrays that consistently correlate with a feature in the environment.
Or things which must not change in order to maintain a particular perception of something in the environment.
Yeah.
Right, so there are certain things that must not vary, because if these properties varied, then your perception would be lost of that particular thing.
The perception of this rotating.
Of it being a single object
Loses
versus.
those things.
Yes.
Okay,
And
that helps.
so
All right.
okay, back to this. I'm sorry that's so difficult. I really have tried hard to nail it into your minds, and I obviously haven't succeeded. But so, let's for a moment hold loosely the idea of the invariant, and we can come back to it in a moment. Where it fits in here is, I'm going to claim that whatever the invariant of the du jour is a pattern. It's an attractor in the optic array. Now that's a claim that we're going to unpack a little bit, and then as far as justifying it, we have to get back to the idea of what an invariant is, which I hoped was a little stronger in people's minds. But
I'm sorry, I have to ask one question. So, I'm thinking in terms of Barham's diagram earlier. When I think of the attractor here, so the optic array, that's something that's still in the environment, right? That's not actually.
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
Can you
sure.
hold on that?
I'll wait.
Okay,
I'll
I've got
wait.
a figure.
Yep.
All right. So visual perception thus couples environmental oscillators.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Visual perception thus couples environmental oscillators with perceptual oscillators via oscillatory modes in the optic array. This is the idea.
Yeah.
Poulin has already hinted that you see where I'm going with this. Okay? Now, I'm going to expand on this. I've got some figures, some visualizations, some other ways to put it. If you get hung here, we can come back.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a visual of what I just described in that last bullet. That's what you were saying, right, Bullen?
I'll have to get back to that code, but seems right.
Back to what?
To that paragraph and directly relate this to what I was saying then. I don't exactly remember.
Okay. Do you want to go back now?
It might help, yeah.
Okay. All right, everybody, we're going to go back to a previous slide. Is the quote here?
Yeah, just a minute.
That first paragraph, let's read it out loud. Would you?
Yeah, that is the low energy constraints act as semantic information with respect to the functional action, indicating the presence of those external conditions which successfully support this action. I was saying that those external conditions were the Planck in this case. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I think
External conditions were what?
the Planck. And what I would say, those external conditions are the high energy environmental oscillators,
yeah.
and the optic arrays are low energy.
Right.
Actually, I should have made that clarification on the figure. But this is the and I'm going to go back to the Barham figure again with this idea in a moment.
No, I don't, why is it that the thing on the left is it represents an environmental oscillator as opposed to a perceptual oscillator?
This is a metaphor. They're both represented as as metronomes here. I'm trying to invoke the organization that we saw in the first slide, that video, between the metronomes, and how we describe the coupling here.
So the difference here is the perceptual, so I'm going to try to merge, and I'm not sure if you're going to do this in a later slide, but related to what Barham is saying, part of this is within the system, part of this is outside of the system in the environment, and you're trying to get synchronization between something within Barham's system
And the surround?
and, well, in this case, I guess so the environmental oscillator, you said that's the low energy?
Yeah, and that's actually
Okay.
gonna be the plank.
Okay. Okay, so the dynamical,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
Optic,
Gi-
okay.
Gibson, I'm taking it from Barham and I'm going back into Gibson's terminology, and if you
Okay.
remember, I'm sorry, I guess
Well-
perhaps I needed to review this.
So is this the epistemon then, the perceptual oscillators, or is that
Yes.
something?
Yeah, that's what it's going to be, and I'll go back to the diagram. But so both this should say, to make a better correspondence with Barham, that should say high energy environmental oscillators. However, in this case, this whole system, the terminology in this slide is Gibsonian, not Barhamian.
Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to make a concordance between the two. And so, in Gibson terminology, he talks about the environment, the medium, and the organism. And so go ahead. So he uses the word environment in a slightly different way than Barham does, because Barham includes would include the optic array in the environment, and that's logical. But Gibson just creates something called the medium, which is where the optic array lives, the ambient illumination. And when he talks about environmental things, he doesn't exclude optic array from the environment, but I think he would say the environment and the organism aren't separate anyway. You know, I mean, that's the whole point of this dynamical model. So we really don't need to draw the line. But this is the terminology. The reason I use this language in this slide is because I'm Gibsonian here. We're going to looking at Gibson dynamically, and so so an invariant in the optic array is like this pattern on a board full of high frequency metronomes, for instance. Metaphorically. Okay? Now, so back to Barham's slide, which I've updated. If you look at the labels, it now has specific labels. Light reflecting surfaces are the high energy oscillator. The ambient illumination is the low energy oscillator that is the source of information for the organism. The perceptual system is the epistemon, and we have the action. The invariants, let's see, live in the ambient illumination. Now, here is a quote from from what Poulin read just a moment ago. The epistemon predicts that the overall functional action, if undertaken now, will be successful, and that's the affordance.
Okay, now it's beginning to make some sense.
Okay.
So the question was just, what was the light reflecting surface on the previous one?
Okay, this is from Gibson's description of the environment.
Okay.
He says that objects in the environment are perceived as such in the visual context because they have light reflecting surfaces.
Okay.
And so that's what's in the environment that is in a correlation with the optical array. He says that the B and C have to be highly correlated.
Okay.
And so that's the source of the correlation, is that illuminative interaction of those surfaces with the ambient light. All right, so putting it another way.
Let me see, go back, just for a moment. Okay, I'm happy.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm happy you're happy. Okay. So a phase transition in B
I don't remember, what is B?
He used the light reflecting surface.
is the light reflecting surface or the high energy environmental oscillator.
Oh, okay,
And the light reflecting surface would be an example of such,
yeah,
or the tree or the glucose source or whatever. Triggers a phase transition
and C,
in C, which in turn triggers a phase transition,
and D,
which in turn triggers a phase transition in A, the functional action. And the trigger for that last one corresponds to the affordance.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Gibson from a dynamical point of view. At least one way.
One way of doing that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's 5:15. Okay, now this is a nice thing that came from Kelso's book on dynamic patterns. Gibson's essential point is that information must be meaningful and specific to the control of to the control and coordination requirements of action, rather than grounding perceptual theory on brain states or as computational rules that generate three-dimensional forms from two-dimensional images on the retina. The Gibsonian program asks how structured energy distributions are lawfully related to the environments and actions of animals. So that structured energy distribution is the invariant. The structure is the part. The light is constantly changing, but there is something in the change that isn't changing. It persists. So I walk around this room, and the shapes of these objects that they project onto my retina, onto my optic array that my retina is picking up, is constantly changing. But my perception of them doesn't change. Gibson says that's because there is something in the optic array that's invariant. And that's consistent with the dynamical model because the dynamics of the environment is related to the dynamics of the light, and that gets related to my perceptual dynamics. And that's what I believe is meant by direct perception, that there's a direct coupling. Whereas there's not some kind of indirect, there's not some kind of code whereby the light is transferred into zeros and ones and then the brain recreates an image from those zeros and ones. That would be indirect. There's some kind of representation in the way. And so the dynamical model affords this direct coupling.
So is this a strong coupling or a weak coupling?
It's weak
So
because
I was thinking it was strong.
Because for instance, what if I'm holding this and I put it in front of Stan, a part of Stan, where I put it in front of part of you. Okay, there's part of you that I can't see.
Right, but still.
Well, I do, but I see it. I mean, I see
Yeah.
Colin.
Yeah, so there is that wiggle room or that what did you call that?
Yes.
Limited.
Limited autonomy.
That scope where.
Wiggle
it's
room.
sitting.
I like that you brought back limited autonomy. That's good. Yeah, and it's why Gibson says that sensation, perception is not caused by sensation. If that were the case, you can have perception of things that you don't see or you don't sense at the moment, and you can also have sensation without perception. If you have a uniform field of white light with no structure that's coming into your retina, you are having sensation.